Hey, MBA hopefuls, we're live on the air with MBA Waves, talking all things business and education. Don't forget to give us a like and a subscribe because it helps us to continue to create all this free MBA Waves content. Today on episode 141, we're talking about how to get your CV or resume MBA ready. Today, we're going to learn about why you'll need to up your resume way before you even apply, how a business school resume will look quite a bit different than when applying for a job, and some key things you'll want to include or exclude for communicating your eligibility to the AdComs. This week, I'm your host, Eric Lucrezia, joined by my co-host, Krithika Srinivasan. Bara Sapir is not with us today, and we're joined by special guest and executive resume writer, Lisa Rangel. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, guys. So just to start us off right away, Lisa, we'll let you take priority in answering, and then we might jump in here and there. You're our guest today, so I'll ask you first. What are some of the big differences when it comes to executive resumes and regular job resumes?
Great question. First and foremost, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I think there's not a lot of difference sometimes between executive resumes and, as you put it, regular resumes. As an executive, there just might be some more complexity. There might be, some higher level concepts that people are dealing with, more strategic versus more tactical at the lower level or at the staff level or the middle level. But for the most part, both need to be very achievement driven. I think a common mistake that I see in both regular resumes and executive resumes is that people tend to focus on tasks and responsibilities and not necessarily selling themselves in a way that shows the reader how well they're doing each of those tasks or how well they've succeeded in each of those areas of responsibility. So I think when a younger person can understand the idea of selling themselves, using their resume to sell themselves by having achievement-driven language, they're ahead of the game, and they're ahead of the game early on, because I'm telling you, sometimes executives are learning later in life that that's the way to do it. So it's less of a difference and more about how soon are you learning how to sell yourself. And that's really where you can have a difference at a younger age.
Sure. I know with your company, Chameleon, you guys are working more with executive profiles, and you were saying off camera that you've seen a lot of people who got to that stage in their career and yet they don't necessarily have those skills for creating an effective resume.
It's, if you've been at a senior level, or if you're in your 50s or your 40s, if you've been recruited or sought after or promoted your entire career, it's a blessing. And, the downside to that blessing is you may not know how to actively do a job search or actively promote yourself. Right. Because through doing good work and your reputation and maybe some good fortune of being in the right place at the right time, it's kind of happened, right? So I remind clients, if they've been laid off after a good run of, say 20, 25 years of working in an accelerated, increased responsibility type of manner, then it's okay because they've been gainfully employed for that long, and again, the downside is they don't know how to do a search. And I remind people, if you don't know how to do a search because you're gainfully employed, you got to choose your problems, right? I tell my kids, choose your problems. You're always going to have problems, right? You either have problems of abundance or problems of scarcity. And if you know how to look for a job, most likely it's because you're looking for one every 2-3 years, right? So you don't have the continuity. So it just depends on the perspective. But the knowing some of this stuff even before you go to business school can help you then capitalize on that business school degree upon graduation in a better way than not knowing it, and knowing it as you continue your career. And I say continue because I suspect most, B school applicants have some work experience already. Not everyone's going straight from an undergrad situation. So, it's continuing your career knowing this stuff. Then it's every time you make a move, you want to think, how can I position myself to sell myself, and how can I speak about this to applaud my achievements, but in a diplomatic, not, objective way. You don't want to do this in a subjective way, because then that's when you come across like a braggart or you come across cheesy. But doing it in an objective, factual way then lends to your credibility as well, and it makes it easier to sell yourself, right? Because it's a fact. So.
If I may, before Krithika asks the next question, you bring up a couple of things. And first of all, yeah, our audience members who are coming directly out of undergrad applying for a master's level program, they're looking at master's in management, master's in finance, that kind of thing. Whereas MBA, by definition, they have usually at least minimum 2-3 years experience, on average 5 or 6.
Right.
Sometimes you see up to 8 or 10, and beyond that, you're looking at executive. And yet, it may be the case that the person is not fully taking advantage of the career services at their previous campuses. So that's definitely a thing. I forgot the other points. So I'm going to let Krithika.
Actually, if you don't mind me interrupting you, to the audience, this may not be linear, right? But you mentioned something, about they may not capitalize on the Career Center fully. And, I will also share my experiences of working with career centers is that typically, and this is typically, right, it's a general statement, typically career centers function is to bring in-house or campus recruiting functions from companies on campus. So this way, whether it's undergrad or grad, those students can then have jobs come to them and get placed or find work through that campus recruiting effort. And so a lot of times the resumes get written how the campus recruiters want to see them. And if they're getting a stack of resumes from a bunch of grads who are going to show up for the career fair, putting them in a certain format so it's easy for the the campus recruiter to just kind of flip through them, it serves its purpose, having the resume in a certain format based on what the campus recruiting center, the Career Center tells you to do, makes sense. But when you put then that resume that was devised by the Career Center to appeal to campus recruiters out in the wild, it may not serve the same purpose. And so writing your resume with the reader in mind is paramount. And this is paramount even as doing a resume for an MBA application. Who's your reader? What are they going to want to see? And then upon graduation, who's your reader? What do you want them to see? Again, is it a campus recruiter? Is it a corporate recruiter sitting at their desk at corporate headquarters or in their remote office? Is it a hiring manager, working for the director or EVP of a supply chain or a C-level person as a hiring manager? So you have to write and format the resume based on who you're targeting. And sometimes people lose sight of that. So I'm going to tell you all now before you get to B school, make sure you have a resume that looks different than what they tell you to do for the Career Center typically, because their focus mainly is to cater to campus recruiting and they don't focus to the search outside. And most people don't get hired through campus recruiting. So, you have to know there's more hope outside of campus recruiting if you're one of those people who doesn't get hired through campus recruiting. I didn't get hired through campus recruiting. So you have to do a search outside of it. And there is life outside of that, 100%. Sometimes even better jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember what I was going to say earlier. You were speaking about people don't necessarily know how to speak about their achievements in a way that sounds like, okay, this is what I've achieved. It's more factual and it's positive versus bragging and coming off the wrong way. And I was going to say there's a very cultural dimension to that. I know you're based in the States. I know you have worked with many clients outside of the States as well. And you can see the difference in the way people express themselves. Certain cultures don't necessarily feel comfortable in speaking about their achievements in a way that maybe, whether it's for companies or for business schools in the States, if that's where your target is, are used to seeing. And so people need to learn how to communicate in a certain way. And I think that ties into what you're saying is knowing your audience. When I speak about when you're doing your CV or your resume, I talk about the 4 axes, right? This is CV 101, right? The 4 axes for me that influence your CV, what you're going to include, the contents and the structure are: 1, what is your industry? What career you're working in? The CV or the resume of someone in finance is going to look different than marketing, than a dancer, an astronaut, or a teacher, of course. Then, what country? So geography has a huge influence. Culture, what you would include. For example, in the English-speaking world, it's totally not normal to include a photo and your date of birth usually. In France, you always you have a driver's license. For the Americans, we're like, well, everyone has a car, right? I've seen everything from height to weight to religion and some things that just
marital status, kids, the whole thing, right?
And then the third one for me is goals. what is the goal or the aim of this CV? Are you applying for business school? Are you applying for a job, a volunteer experience, an internship? And the fourth one I would say is your personality, which is where you get to put a lot of your own individuality and creativity into that. And without further ado, I wanted to let Krithika ask her question.
Yeah, all good.
I'm loving the conversation. To piggyback on Eric's point and also Lisa, what you were saying before, it seems to me that when you want to go up, what got you there is not going to get you to the next stage.
Right.
Because you're always changing and modifying and amplifying something different in your career journey than what you did before. So, but in today's world, you have so many things that can help you get closer to the role you want, especially your network, LinkedIn, and so on. Do you still think the resume matters?
Love that question. Here's the thing. I think that good, bad, or indifferent, we have a multitude of ways that you can get hired nowadays, right? And have conversations start. So a resume's goal ultimately is to land you an interview. It's not there to get you hired. You're not going to get an offer from submitting a resume. The goal of a resume is to get you a conversation, to get you an interview. And your profile can get you an interview. DMing somebody on any social media channel can start a conversation. Sending an email can get you a conversation. Meeting somebody at a conference can get somebody a conversation. So we have a multitude of tools now that can facilitate a conversation happening. So I think that people who say, "Oh, the resume is dead," I mean, they've been saying the resume is dead since Monster ran U.S. Super Bowl ads back in 2000, right? And it's still here. I think what will never die is the process in which someone has to go through to develop their achievements. That resume building process, whether it ends up on a resume, whether it ends up as interview talking points, whether it ends up on a profile, whether it ends up in an executive bio, whether it ends up in an application for undergrad, grad, B school, law school, anything. That process in which you highlight how well you do something to then show the reader that you have a better and maybe more applicable experience set than your competitor, that will never go out of style. And it typically comes in the format of a resume, but it can come in a multitude of forms. And that's why we do other things. I'm sure that's why you do other things. But, being able to sell yourself in modern formats will never go out of style. And so I think that's what people have to realize. And I could tell you that if you're not already encountering it, as technology advances, there's going to be, in my opinion, there's going to be a bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots, the know-hows and the don't-know-hows. And the more you can have tools that allow you to meet people where they are, because you're always going to have people on your team that are technologically astute and technologically, even outright phobic. And the more you can meet people where they are and have tools in which to have those conversations, then you're going to end up appealing to more people and I think accelerate more.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, going back to what you were talking about earlier, like your responsibility-driven resume, how do you shift your task or responsibility-driven resume to an achievement-based one?
That's a great question. So a simple way is to ask yourself, how do you know you did a good job? Right? Take any random task-driven bullet on your resume and ask yourself, how do you know you did a good job doing that? And imagine your boss saying, "I don't think you're doing a good job with that." You'd go, "Yeah, I am." Da, 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 and you'd have a list of how you've done well at that particular task. What that good job looks like as you describe it, therein lies your achievement. And I always try to give somebody the analogy, like, or the image. I shouldn't say it's an analogy, it's the image. I recruited for 13 years before I started Chameleon, and recruiters on a screen, right? Because nobody's looking really at paper resumes anymore. Everything's on a screen of some kind. They're flipping through resumes on the screen one after another. And so if everyone has tasks It's literally, I'm telling you what it looks like on the other side. It literally looks like I'm reading a bunch of job descriptions that have people's name on them at the top, and there's no differentiation. But as soon as then I flip to somebody who's got, numbers and percentages and outcomes, and, then I'm like, okay, this person actually measures the things. They know how well they're doing it. They know what failure looks like, because clearly they have some successes here. So, and I know that sounds, very, North American or US centric, but learning how to talk about your achievements in a diplomatic, objective way really is a universal stance, right? This is not about bragging. This is about just stating facts that you created an outcome for based on the work that you do. And, if you're working for maybe a very local company, in France or in India or in any other country outside the US, it might behoove you to stick to that task-driven background document. But, companies now are multinational. They might be based in Germany, but have, 40 other subsidiaries, of which some are in North American locations. So you're dealing with those individuals in North America, or it might be a North American based company that has subsidiaries in, Europe and Asia and Africa. And so having sort of a universal speak in the form of, diplomatic delivery of facts is really how you start to speak amongst people. Because otherwise the task is subjective. People may think a certain task being executed one way is going to be this, it's hard to say, like, I did this 100 times. That can't be debated. But somebody saying I did this, you don't know if they mean twice or they mean 300, right? So having the actual facts being, not that you're the best, because again, that's subjective too, but having facts as your achievements starts to then become a universal language and subliminally sends a message that you know how to function in multinational environments.
Sure. And for better or for worse, the MBA is a U.S. invention, right? So it started, I think, in the 30s at Wharton.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, it was like a sort of a pre-MBA model that existed at Harvard. Wharton, I think, was the first to call it an MBA, and it spread around the U.S., then to Canada, and the first one outside of North America was INSEAD, actually. Came in, I want to say, 59 or something like that. And since then, it's spread around Europe and Asia and so forth. And, it still kind of embodies this American approach to business, the CVs that, people submit, even though they call them CVs in most other countries, it still is a Western format. Nearly all schools around the world, it's either one, max 2 pages. Personally, I'm a big fan of a one-pager. Why? It's just nice to see that whole snapshot on one page. I'm 47. If I can get my whole career at one page, you can too, 28-year-old. And so, I think, I think focusing on what's important, understanding your audience, again, going back to that. In terms of experience, I prefer to call that section relevant professional experience, which is an indicator that you're not necessarily talking about everything you've ever done since starting. And yeah, focusing on impact. Getting to the point is a skill, and I think that it's great to demonstrate that early on, right? In business, we have limited time, resources, and people, and we still got to get the job done. So,
amen. Amen.
CV is a great way to communicate that. Go ahead, Krithika.
To me, what struck out was how you phrased this, Lisa, saying that it's a data delivery of facts. And I think for the first time I'm thinking about it is like how the resume takes out the subjectivity,
Right.
and helps also the person to think deeper about the ways in which business measured them or measure their output, for possibly like the first time they're thinking about how much of what they did actually helped their company or their community or somebody else involved, and not just themselves. So yeah, it's very fascinating how much you can put into one page, I think. And for some of the people, they're very dismissive of their achievements, saying that, oh, this is like something common that happened in my company, or this is something that is there. So how do you think people can highlight the best of their career journeys?
I would look, if it's a general resume, for job seeking, I would focus on the job description and cherry pick the achievements that seem to speak to what the job is needing. You know, and I'll defer to you to correct me or add to this if I'm wrong or not including everything, but is regarding an MBA resume. You know, it's not only what you've done, but I think, you know, company or schools are looking to have diversified experiences, and to make sure they're choosing a class that can enrich each other. And so I think highlighting not so much even the achievements, obviously that matters, like regarding your career or the work part, but there's even more, right? You know, I think on job resumes, you tend to minimize, if not even take off, like sometimes the hobbies or the volunteer work in some cases, because you really need to focus on more the work experience. Whereas I think on a MBA resume, you can show those achievements through the hobbies and the volunteer work, and show that you're interesting, right? That because I think if everyone has the same hobbies and everybody's coming from the same location, and you know everybody went to the same undergrad school, it's going to be a pretty boring class, right? I mean, even if everybody likes each other, I think everybody's trying to diversify their stories so everybody can learn from each other in addition to the academics. But so I think that there's probably you can create achievements from your volunteer work. You can you can treat everything like it's an employment like experience, and depict how deep or well you did it.
Definitely. Yeah, it is about cherry picking, and it's very. I like the word curating, and same with your.
Yeah, that's a great word. Totally a great word.
You know, we talk about authenticity a lot in the MBA world. Like business schools, each of them has their own culture. They have a mission statement. They have their values that are established. They're trying to cultivate a certain kind of professional, and so they're looking for authenticity in their applicants because dogs and cats and kids are really good at smelling out somebody who's a phoney. Like they just
Yes.
they just don't feel comfortable. Like, nope, don't like that guy. And adcoms are kind of like that. Like they've been looking at thousands and thousands of applications, and they just can sniff it out when somebody's not being authentic. So you really want to do that. And if you, by the way, are so good of an actor that you managed to pull the wool over their eyes and fool them that you're not the person you're portraying yourself as, you're just doing yourself a disservice because you're not going to be a fit in that culture too.
Exactly.
Like convincing the wrong person to marry you.
Right, and you got to maintain the facade when you're there, right? So
right.
Talk about true imposter.
Totally.
But it's an important point that you bring up, and I think people sometimes take this perspective of like, I'm going to do what they want so I can get in. Mm-hmm. And I can't say I haven't done that in my life before. I'm not judging anybody who does it, but like in the end, if you can really work at who you are and express that, frankly, if they don't choose you, you probably dodged a bullet, right? Because like you said, it's probably not going to be your thing. And the rejection could really be what the universe is trying, not to be all woo-woo, but like the universe is trying to tell you to go a different way. This isn't it. Right. So, but if you shift your mindset to, I'm going to be the best me I can be, the most authentic me I can be, and hopefully I'm it, then you got in on your merits, right? You got in based on, as opposed to having the mindset of I'm going to do what they need. I think if you do what they need and betray who you are, that's never going to be a pleasant experience. If you do what they need without betraying who you are, that's going to be a great experience. It's probably a great fit.
Absolutely.
And that's, people lose sight of that, because they get so hung up with I got to go to Harvard, I got to go to blah, blah, blah. And that just may not be it,
Exactly. I mean, say you want to get into Stanford, right? And so, of course, you're motivated to be the best applicant you can be. You want to know, what are they looking for, right? So you get on their website, you talk to alumni, you talk to the recruiters, any research you can sink your teeth into, right? On this mission to find out what they want. But then you're finding really what they're about. And at some point when you're in this journey, if it's like there's so many things that are not resonating with you, one would think that you would naturally be like, maybe this isn't the place for me. Like, this is not my tribe. You know what I mean? So I think, again, you're doing a disservice to yourself trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. The brand of a M7 school or a top 20 school, like I said to you again off camera, I think it can be sexy and it can please the ego, make your parents proud and all that stuff. And I do think it opens doors in the short term. I think in the long term of your career, though, it's about how good you are. It's about the impact you have at the companies that you've worked at post-degree. It's about how good you are communicating your successes and networking that will take you farther than that brand. So it is about being authentic. But coming back to what you were saying earlier about curation, right, on your CV and your LinkedIn, authentic but curated, right? You don't need to tell them every single thing you've ever done.
Right.
You know, so it's about being mindful. And again, with limited space, you're already forced to cull out some things.
Right. Choose what you want to continue to be known for and do, because you know, maybe in your mid-20s or mid-30s, this isn't as relevant, but I can tell you once you get to your mid-40s and mid-50s, I'm 54, you know, I can tell you I'm good at a lot of things. There's some of them I never want to do again, you know, short of having to like feed my kids, right? So like, but if you tend to put everything you can do, trying to show somebody you can do a lot, you're going to have things on there that you will get noticed for, but then you're like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do that at school. I don't want to do that in the next job. And you really have to highlight what you want to continue doing, because then you'll get chosen for that. Right. And that's not to say you won't talk about the thing you're good at, but don't want to do anymore on an interview or whatnot, or it may not be a story you tell in certain circles. But your resume is a marketing document, right? It's not an itinerary of everything you've ever done, or, you know, a biography of everything you've ever done, right? Or an obituary. It's not, it's a marketing document. And so you need to put on there what you want to then appeal to someone for them to want to have a conversation with you. And then you know, people think another mistake people make is sometimes they forget that, but they feel that in order to impress someone, they have to put everything in, and it's actually counterintuitive. It's the opposite. If you want to appeal to someone, you have to narrow your message and pick something and not put everything.
Totally.
And,
traits, right? Master of none.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, you know, when people feel, and even when looking for a job, people feel, especially if they really need to find something and they're, you know, not everybody's doing a job search out of complete comfort and leisure. You know, their intuitive stance is like, all right, let me just be broad and tell them I'm open. And it's like, actually, that's like the worst thing you can do. Like, being open appeals to nobody. But if you say, I'm looking for blankety, 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 blank, do you know who I can speak to that has this title? Because they're typically people that are involved in my level of hiring. You may get some no's, but the yeses are going to be amazing, right?
So, yes.
And you're not making the person do the work, because when you say I'm open, you're basically putting the burden on the person who's listening to that request, going, oh, now I got to figure out where this person belongs. And most recruiters, most readers, most friends, colleagues that you're networking with aren't going to take the time to do it. Usually their response back is, yeah, I'll keep an eye out for you. You know what I mean? But nothing comes. And being specific and picking a lane for who you are is truly the most powerful thing you can do. It doesn't mean you'll never veer from the lane. It doesn't mean somebody may say, I know you're looking for X, but would you consider X with a little y? But they only know how to do that. They'll only know to do that because you picked X. But when you say open, it's bizarre. I don't have any scientific reasons why it happens, but I've seen it happen over and over again. When you're broad, it doesn't work and you appeal to nobody. And there's always people that are more specific you're competing against that then outshine you. But when you are specific, you get more traction and you get more attention.
Good point, Lisa. Like, okay, I was a biochem major, and like, I do not want to do any more redox reactions, and I'm glad someone else invented CRISPR. But like, you know, the reality is that's my degree, right? My bachelor's degree is in science and natural sciences, and that has nothing to do with what I'm doing today. So I'm going to ask you, as you know, you have the long view, right? You're dealing with people who are often, I think, in their 40s, right?
40s, 50s, 60s, yeah.
Yeah, and you can, that long view looking back. What do you advise to people that have a degree that is kind of far from what their target is, and how to pitch that, spin that.
Embrace every part of your story. I went to Cornell as an engineering major. I think I hated it 2 days in, and I transferred to the hotel school. So I graduated with a bachelor's in hotel administration, and I graduated thinking I wanted to design kitchens and restaurants. And so I decided to work in restaurants. I had worked in restaurants throughout my whole time in high school and in college. And I wound up I thought I'd be a better designer if I worked in restaurants longer, and I wound up never making it to designing, and I wound up working in high-end resorts for 4 years in restaurants. And my boss from my second job out of school, 4 years out of school, said, "You'd be a great recruiter." I had no idea what that was. Zero idea. I'm glad she didn't tell me to go do something else, like join the Hare Krishnas or something like that, because I probably would have done it. Because I love this woman. She was one of the best managers I ever had. So when I was in California at the time, when I came back to New York, I literally looked up ads, not to date myself, but to be a headhunter or recruiter. And that's how I became a recruiter. And she was right. I was good. I did it for 13 years. And then I found myself laid off in 2009, and I started writing resumes because I was good at it from recruiting. People needed them in 2009. I was in New York. I worked for a recruiting company whose second biggest client was Bear Stearns. That obviously went by the wayside. So the company's still around, but they laid off a ton of people that year. And so I started writing resumes, and then I realized I can make it as a business. And I could tell you that my engineering brain, my analytical brain, and hospitality focused mindset contributes to how we service our clients. And I do job search advising, and do my job with my team every day. So I could tell you your biochem brain is affecting how you do your work today.
Absolutely.
Like everything about someone's story is part of what they do today. And the more you can embrace that story, even if it is a big zig and you zagged, it's a mindset that contributes to how you do your job today. And the key is to just do that work to find how it works. So there's no mistakes, in my opinion. There's absolutely no mistakes. Like if I didn't get to Cornell, I would have, as an engineer, I would have never got to the hotel school, because growing up in a, lower middle class family in Jersey City, I'm telling you, if I told my mother I wanted to go to college to go to the hospitality school and, work in restaurants, she's like, just go work down the block at Summit Pizza. You don't need to go to degree. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
So everything happens the way it's supposed to. If I somehow didn't go to California, I wouldn't have found my husband, and I wouldn't have had that boss who told me to go be a recruiter. So there's no mistakes. It's just whatever happens in the path, and then what you do to capitalize on it.
I love that story. Sorry, Krithika.
You're channeling Master Oogway, right? In Kung Fu Panda, there's no accident.
Yeah, there's no accident. I know that's not a unique concept. I probably just don't know the name of it in many other cultures.
There's a little bit of butterfly effect in there, but it really reminds me of that story that Steve Jobs told at the Stanford commencement address in 2004 or something like that. The one that ends with he says, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." But he tells a story about how he went to college at some local school in California for I don't know what he was studying, but he ended up sitting on classes about typeface. And
yes,
he learned
I saw that. That was great, right?
Yeah, and then because of that class,
I only saw that recently in the last couple of years. I don't know how I never saw that, but I did.
And that passion for typeface and different fonts and stuff stayed with him, and that became integrated into the first computers that he made. So that's fantastic. That nothing is for naught, and yes.
No, and it's funny. Despite what I do for a living, like helping people find jobs, I often joke that sometimes I don't know what I want to do when I grow up, and I've kind of always felt this way. But I'm a big believer, if you do what's in front of you the best that you can, it typically starts to unfold what's next. Whether somebody comes to you because of your work output, your work ethic, because you just meet people because of the world you're in. If you sit and wait for it to come, I think it never comes for most people. Very few people have the epiphany and go, oh, I'm going to go do this. And then they go do it and they actually like it and they stay in it. I don't think that happens for most people, but yet that's what's romanticized with college, with graduate school, with everything, right? It's like, sometimes it's okay to not know what the hell you want to do. and just do the best thing, do the next thing in front of you as best you can and see where it takes you. But as long as you're doing that, stuff will come.
This is amazing because it is so applicable to our MBA aspirants.
Yes.
Because they know they have to go to business school and they want to get to business school, but sometimes they don't know why or what next and so on. And Lisa, I like to think that what you're doing is getting people into executive roles and senior management roles and everything which our candidates in B school would want, actually.
Exactly.
So I like to think that B school is actually the playing ground, and and even a place for them to take their training wheels and test out private equity class, or or even like be part of an impact club or something, or take out like a consulting project to get into consulting and so on.
Right.
So how do you think people can tailor their MBA resumes towards their career aspirations?
Do research on the company. Do go on LinkedIn and look at people who work there, see what they highlight. Get a vibe, look at job openings that they have, even if it's jobs you would never do or not qualified for, but just see what they ask for. Not so much the tasks and the job responsibilities, but the traits, the non-descriptives, so to speak, the non-measurables, right? That they may put their values, their what they tend to do and say outside of any corporate speak type of events, and then, to use Eric's words, and then curate accordingly. What is what they want to see that you want to continue doing, right? Again, it's not just people pleasing, because that never leads anybody to any place good. but making sure you're not betraying who you are in appealing to what they want. And it could be also with schools. I can tell you that I would do this if I was going to an MBA program, or looking at an MBA program. I did it with my kids when they went to college. Go to the school page on LinkedIn. Look at the alumni. Look at what they've done. Look at what they do. Look at how they present themselves. Is there any common themes? Is there maybe no common themes, right? But is there common themes? Is there common levels of achievement? Is there do they tend to be all sort of rogue and alternative, kind of outside of the corporate structure? Are they completely within the corporate structure, all Fortune 500? And then if that's where you want to be, then showcase your Fortune 500 experience, or showcase your alternative rogue entrepreneurial ventures. Or again, there could be a philosophy of, in terms of being unique, to diversify a base. If you really are one of these rogue alternative, entrepreneurial types, and you want to go to, a school that typically churns out Fortune 500 leaders, give it a shot. They may view you as a differentiator, right? So it depends on the school. It depends on the philosophy. It depends on, the strategy of both the candidate and the school, and how it can be matched. Sometimes it's a compliment. Sometimes it's carbon copy, right? But in the end, any of those shiftings and changings that you're doing, it has to always be in alignment with what your head and heart say and do. Because like I think we were talking about earlier, if it works and it's not authentic, well, now you're with people who you're going to end up probably not liking, or not feeling like you have a lot in common, or worse, you're faking it the whole time. Now you got to maintain the facade, right? So you're going to have imposter syndrome all day long. So I think it's a combination of looking at what the culture puts out, and then cherry picking what is authentically you that complements or matches that.
100%. Lisa, I wanted to ask you, how do you make yourself stand out? How do you make yourself, how do you make yourself look interesting as an MBA candidate on your resume or CV?
I think, unlike executive resumes, you really have an opportunity to expand upon the other non-work aspects that you can put on a resume. And this will challenge the one-page rule that you have, but 2 pages, I think, for people with more than 10 years of experience is more than acceptable. But if you have interesting volunteer experience, if you have interesting, not the, run of the mill hobbies, or even if they are common, like what do you do that's unique about it? If you're a runner, are you, marathon runner? Are you, the master of the 5K and you've done 70 of them in a year? Just what is it that you're proud of, right? That makes you, like, what can you talk about for 15, 20 minutes without writing a script for, and maybe highlight some of that, because if it's stuff you enjoy, you want it to be accepted and maybe even something you can continue doing in school. School is a place where you can learn new things, but it's also a place where you can be who you are, right? So, and if that's something, if you volunteer or you help, food pantries or whatever the case may be, like put some size and scope to it. How often do you go? How many, meals are being served? Do you do any strategic work with regards to the operation of it? Like all this stuff is interesting to people and differentiates you from someone else who, also worked in a corporation and did these, very visibly satisfiable internships. Well, how do you look different? Well, what do you do outside? And if you're in a situation, not everyone has the ability to go volunteer 10 hours a week or, do the training commitments of, an ultra marathon, right? But, if you're raising a family or if you, care for elderly parents or whatever, I think just embracing that instead of viewing that as a downside, it may not appeal to some, 100%, but guess what? It will appeal to others. And those are probably your people. So again, about being authentic, instead of hiding that you have a family, you're going to be an MBA student that has a family on campus and, or you're doing it remotely with an EMBA and you caring for an elderly parent who lives with you. I think talking about that is talking about real life and showing that you can still do all this while doing real life things. I think is authentic. And then you're going to appeal to people who are going to accept you in places where that's going to be okay and not going to be a detriment. Right. Mm-hmm. And it should never be a detriment, but we know that reality is reality, right? And sometimes it is for certain situations. So I just say embrace exactly who you are and amplify it. And then you'll find your people.
That's just good overall advice. I like that.
And I appreciate you saying that, but I even have a hard time.
That's why we have coaches, right?
Yeah,
coaches.
Right. That's why we can't do this alone, right? So, but yeah, it's hard to follow, even though it's easy to say.
And this is where I had a question about how the behavior-based, most of the executives go in for behavior-based interviews, and there's a lot more emphasis on having the right fit for a role later on, not the hard skills, as they say, more
Right.
about culture, the values, the soft skills, and everything else they bring to the table. How do you say that some of the MBA candidates can also be prepared for it? Because for some of them it's a 1 year program, for some of them it's just like 16 months, 18
Right.
months, 2 years, and most of them are headed for an internship as soon as they land into business school.
I think post-COVID, I think that soft skills, the most important soft skills shifted, and what I've read about, what I personally have seen is being able to have stories that show that you are empathetic, that you can empathize with people different than you, because workforces are diverse, right? So, and I'm not just talking, what we would call protected classes in the U.S., race, gender, sex. I'm not talking only about that, but like, people with different family situations than you, or, people who have different beliefs than you, or people who, wear their hair differently than you, or just anything different, not just what, can be clickbait, in journalism, but showing that you can, because you're going to then show that you can attract people. Executive traits nowadays, I think, the desirable ones are you able to attract talent, top talent? And being that type of person that somebody wants to work with and for is a soft skill, 100%. And that's not a simple thing to develop, right? You have to, and then showing that you can bring talents from different parts of society. It's really easy to, and frankly, a little lazy to only pick people from top schools, right? But there's talent everywhere, right? So how do you go find it? And how are you somebody that person from a different background wants to work for? I think showing that you can handle business situations that you can pivot in business situations that aren't going to be found in some MBA textbook. I mean, if we didn't learn from COVID that certain situations are not in the textbook, good Lord, right? So, and showing that you can fail fast, admitting you can fail fast, because when you can fail fast, you're saving your company money. If you're somebody who puts your head in the sand and going, oh, it's going to work, it's going to work. I mean, there's believing in yourself, and then there's being an idiot, right? Like you have to be able to say this isn't working and scrap it to start over, and that takes some gumption. And so I think these are the types of skills that if you have stories behind to demonstrate how you attract talent, demonstrate how you attract or you have people that work for you a long time because you care for them and you're empathetic, and you have demonstrated how you've pivoted when things didn't go in any predictable way, then you're going to be ahead of people who don't have those stories, who tend to check boxes of how I made money, save money, streamlined a process. Like those are easier achievements. But if you can start showing achievements where you are demonstrating these soft skills and you're doing them, you're going to be ahead of most.
Wow. I really like some of the things that you mentioned, because they're not any different than what you want in what an employer would want, today's world. And I think
it's funny to get back to the question you guys asked earlier, like the difference between I think it was a general resume or regular people resume and, an executive. Like, I mean, I'll do high school kids, grads, like friends of mine or whatever. And, you can, say they were a server at a restaurant, like they'll write, clean the tables, serve the people, sold the things, brought the food. Right. And it's like, do you know your average check? Do you know your average check? Did you make sure you sell dessert every time at the table, and so you raised your check average? Did you did you turn tables faster without making people feel rushed, and so now you got more covers in your station? Like, I mean, even as a dishwasher, right? Like, did you look at the process? Did you make sure that you talked to the servers that they should only put the dishes this way? Like, so you're able to do things and you were never behind. Like, everything has a process mentality. Everything has a way of streamlining. Everything has a cost improvement. Everything has a way that, you contribute to revenue. I mean, Lord knows if you don't have any clean plates, you can't put any food out. And if you don't put food out, people aren't leaving the tables. And if people aren't leaving the tables, you can't turn them to make money. So like there's no job, in my opinion, that somebody has at a charity. Like everything has an achievement, and so it's just a matter of helping someone through that. If it's not something, it's not a place, not a way they normally think.
We got a question from one of our colleagues and friends, Marlena. She asks, how can an applicant...
Marlena, I know Marlena. Hi, how are you?
Well, so just to read it out in case people are listening only, how can an applicant formulate soft skill achievements on an MBA style resume? It's harder to find numbers for this.
And you may not have numbers, right? But it's about describing the outcome. It's about describing an outcome, and you might have to describe an outcome versus have a number that contributes to that outcome being depicted. If, like, for instance, if, one way to show that you retain talent would be like, how long do your people tend to work for you? How many of them do you have you put into a succession plan? Then or how many of them have gone into, even if they left the company and went on to bigger roles because of, partially because of your tutelage, right? Your work with them. So, and some of it may be resume driven, some of it may be interview story driven, but, showing how you grow your people and how you bring people in, how long they stay, what they've achieved under you. Those are all stories you may or may not have numbers for, but can definitely sell a story with evidence that you attract top talent, attract and develop top talent. So, what are the outcomes? How do you know you're doing that? How well, and what's that good job? How do you know you're doing a good job of being a talent developer? And what does that look like? It may not be a numbers story. It may be an outcome story.
Absolutely. Krithika, I know, has a question she wanted to ask you. Go ahead.
Yeah. And this is like, Lisa, I've been like actually like very curious about your name of your company, Chameleon. And that
it's really not that deep. I'm gonna be honest. So I will tell you the 1-minute version. I was a burnt out recruiter in 2008, 9, and the companies that I had worked for 13 years primarily was mostly Manhattan based. Either I was in Manhattan or it was a Manhattan based company. And a lot of, big banks, Fortune 500, everything was, gray, blue, and, navy blue, steel gray, and maroon for corporate colors. And everything was very conservative and stodgy, for lack of a better way of putting it, traditional. And I was burnt out. I was burnt out on recruiting. I did mostly finance recruiting. But yet I was good at writing resumes, and I was writing them for a lot of people in 2009 when the market bottomed out. And I just felt like I wanted to do an antithesis of what I had done brand wise for the last 13 years. And I literally like chameleons and geckos, and gecko resumes didn't sound so decent. So I picked chameleon. I've come to learn that's a brilliant name. It's about changing the outside, staying true to the inside. I'm like, that sounds lovely, but it wasn't that deep. So
because I was going to say that, that's probably where resumes are headed now, because you have competition in the video resumes. So do you see that often for executive roles?
I see it. Again, it's a tactic in which to sell yourself, right? It's a medium in which to sell how well you do something. Either as an individual and then competitively, you're not going to be able to tell those stories on a video if you don't do the work to build essentially a paper resume, right? Or online resume, because nobody's printing paper anymore. So the process of coming up with how well you do something can be delivered. It's the foundation for a proper interview. It's the foundation for, a proper LinkedIn profile, which we didn't really talk about much. It's a foundation for having conversations with people at a networking event. So it's really the function, and the piece of paper that we call a resume can come in so many different ways. Which is why we do profiles, we do interview coaching, we do all of it, right? But and doing a video resume is essentially the same thing, but it's the same foundation. Excuse me.
We're coughing in unison sometimes. Find your logo.
There it is. Thank you. Yeah, I just went literally the opposite way of corporate, traditional corporate, and I was like, I want it to be colorful and fun and somewhat whimsical, and that's really all it was.
Light color, you're in the right place with MBA Waves.
That's awesome. I know, it's awesome, right? That's awesome.
So, Krithika, any last questions before we take it home?
Yeah, I was going to ask Lisa about how someone could complement the LinkedIn profile with your resumes.
That's it. That's good. Yeah, I think sometimes people forget, and especially for MBA applications, I can imagine they're going to pop your name into LinkedIn and see what you put out there, as well probably other socials, which I'm sure you talk about, and other ways of just making sure your social is cleansed accordingly to make sure that it's not disqualifying you from any way. But I'm a big believer for job seekers that the resume and the profile need to complement each other. You're going to have parts of a resume that exist on a profile and vice versa. There's parts of a resume that don't exist on a profile and vice versa. So even if there are parts that are similar, if not even cut and paste the same, you have to pay attention to the parts that don't exist on the other to maximize that particular medium. the biggest thing for people to keep in mind is if they're looking at their resume, if someone's looking at your resume and they pop your name into LinkedIn, is that same person showing up on LinkedIn? And vice versa. If you're putting down that you're a CFO on your resume, but you haven't looked at your profile in 6 years and you were last a controller, they're going to like, okay, what's that about? Right. So, if you haven't looked at LinkedIn since high school and now you're going to apply for your MBA at, 27, you really should make sure that those things are congruent. That's probably the biggest piece of advice in our tight time here is just make sure they're congruent and complementary.
Definitely. Coming back to the world of MBAs, the reason why I tend to go for like one pagers is some schools actually will only look at a one pager. Famously,
of course, yeah. Obviously, you got to listen to the rules, right?
All the rules. I mean, the schools spend a ton of money and time on those websites, and they're giving you a lot of clues, right? So definitely, that is your first source of truth. And it's going to look differently from school to school. So especially for those of you who are late in your career, have acquired a bunch of experience on the job, you may have a longer one, and that's fine. I personally am just a fan of a one pager, but I think based on those various criteria, what I call the axes of a CV, that will dictate that very, very much. And just to also drive the point home for our MBA applicants, as well as masters in management, finance, and so on, I think it's absolutely essential that you have an active and functional and up-to-date LinkedIn profile. They're going to look for it. That is to say, adcoms, recruiters, even before you meet them, perhaps at an MBA fair. Many of these MBA fairs are by appointment only, right? You sign up, and then they do this.
And they're looking at all that stuff beforehand.
They do this kind of matching situation, and they have to determine, especially the more popular schools, right? If you're looking at top 10 schools, they've got a lot of people that want that meeting just like you do. So you want to stand out, you better have that LinkedIn active, up to date, and matching up with your CV, as you just said. It's a means of filtering. It's a means of following up, and there's a lot of signaling that goes on there. And
you got to look the part. I know we only got like a minute left, barely, but it's about looking the part. I'm a big believer in you do the job that you want, then you get it. And that goes for even B school, right? Like you have to look the part. And, I mentioned to you before, like people go to that school page and look at the alumni. Are you going to be somebody they want representing them? Like you got to look the part. And even with your 20 years at your job, do you look like you haven't looked at your profile in 20 years and you're taking it for granted? Or do you look like somebody worth retaining? Right. So it's always about looking the part.
Sounds very much like just for the job you want. Right?
There you go. Same thing. Bingo.
Well, Lisa, this has been an absolute pleasure to converse with you. Really interesting, really relevant stuff.
Love it. Thank you for asking so much.
Yeah. Thank you to Krithika. Folks in the audience, that's all the time we have for today. Once again, thank you so much, Lisa, Krithika, and everyone who's been paying attention this long. Congratulations, you've made it. If you liked today's episode, please give us a little thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to MBA Waves to stay on top of all the latest trends in business and education. And don't forget to check us out in 2 weeks, same time and same place for full access to upcoming and past episodes. Head to MBAWaves.com.